The train shuddered westward under a bruised sky, its wheels shrieking like something hunted. In the third car from the engine, Evelyn sat with her gloved hands folded in her lap, the scent of coal smoke clinging to the blue serge of her traveling dress. A crumpled letter rested inside her valise. The man who wrote it claimed to own a ranch just north of Vesper Valley. He said little, only that he needed a wife, could offer warmth, land, food, and silence. That last word snagged her. Silence, she was 24, by some lights already old. She left Kentucky behind 3 days ago, left her sister sobbing at the station, left behind Mr. Dodd's belt hanging on the barn nail, the blue bruises he left tucked under her chemise, the low mutter of the neighbors who did nothing when he dragged her through mud like a dog. He was her father only in name. She had known beating since she was 5. The kind that turned skin to meat, the kind that came after spilled milk or forgotten eggs or no reason at all. The kind that broke the cry right out of her. That's how he liked her, silent. When the train finally groaned to a stop at the Vesper station, the platform lay near empty. Wind knifed through the slats in her boots, and the snow underfoot was gray with soot. She stepped down with her valise in one hand and turned toward the far end of the platform, where a man leaned against a post, hat low, eyes shadowed. He didn't hold a sign, didn't wave. Just looked at her in a way that said he'd been waiting. "Evelyn Harper," he said. She nodded once. "I'm Matthew Calloway, got the wagon down the hill." He didn't smile, he didn't offer his arm. But something about his voice, roughened like dried cedar bark, didn't strike her as cruel, just restrained. He walked ahead, expecting her to follow. The road north was little more than frozen ruts through drifts and scrub pine. Matthew said nothing for nearly half an hour. The wind howled. She kept her arms around her coat, teeth clenched. Just when she thought he might go the whole ride without a word, he said, "You ever see snow like this?" "No," she answered. "Hogs freeze where they stand some winters. Learned that the hard way." She watched his hands on the reins, broad, red-knuckled, scarred, not delicate hands, but they didn't tremble. They didn't twitch the way her father's had when he drank. His ranch came into view low in a white valley, a dark line of pines to the west, a creek frozen solid just past the barn. The house was plain pine siding with a rusted chimney and 2 windows boarded on the left. 2 horses in the corral, one brown, one dapple gray, stamped against the cold. He helped her down from the wagon without touching her. She noticed that. Inside the house, the air was still and warm. Fire crackled low in the stone hearth. He cleared his throat. "I'll sleep in the lean-to. That room back there's yours. Got a bolt inside the door. You'll be safe." That word again, safe. She didn't know what that meant yet, didn't trust it. He left her there without another word. Just the slam of the outer door, the creak of boots in snow. Evelyn stood in the center of that plain pine room, letting her breath return to her, letting her hands thaw. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. That night she bolted the door, lay beneath the quilt, and watched shadows shift across the low ceiling. The wind moaned and the rafters creaked, but nothing stirred beyond. No footsteps, no belt. In the morning she found a tin cup of coffee and a heel of bread on the table, and a note in clean, square handwriting. "Take your time. No one's in a rush here." He had signed it, M. She didn't know it yet, but her bones had already begun to loosen in this strange place. Not from love, not yet, but from the absence of fear. And that was the root of all beginnings. Matthew Calloway didn't speak much. He was tall, rangy, wore the same oilskin coat every day. She learned he'd fought at Shiloh, carried 2 bullets still, lost a brother and came west with no real purpose but to be left alone. He let her be. Never crossed the threshold to her room, never raised his voice. The third morning she woke to find her valise moved, just slightly. Panic flared, but it faded when she saw the folded parcel beside it, a fresh dress, navy calico. Fine stitching, her size. A single tag pinned to the collar, yours. She didn't know how to wear gratitude, but she put it on anyway. That afternoon, he taught her how to feed the pigs. Said nothing when she dropped the pail the first time, just picked it up and let her try again. His silence wasn't heavy. It left space for breath. Evening meals were quiet. Salt pork, beans, hard bread, once or twice a thin stew. He didn't stare at her, didn't watch her eat, just sat across from her like a man who knew how to be present without taking. It unsettled her more than rage ever had. He didn't ask about Kentucky. She didn't ask about his brother. Some nights he read aloud from a tattered psalter, never preached, just words for the fire to chew on. One verse made her pause: love suffereth long and is kind, love envieth not, is not puffed up. She didn't understand what kind had to do with love, not yet, but she wanted to know. One night she woke screaming, dreamed of the strap, dreamed of being dragged by the wrist through sawdust and chicken blood. She woke gasping, nails clenched into her own throat. For a moment she couldn't tell where she was, then she heard it, slow boots on the porch, one knock. You all right? She didn't answer, the boots didn't move. Evelyn, he said again, voice low. If you need anything. Nothing else, just that, and silence. She got up, unbolted the door. He didn't step in, just stood there in the cold with his hat in his hands. She met his eyes, and for the first time didn't flinch. I'm sorry, she whispered. You don't owe me that. She stared at him until the wind burned her cheeks. You ever hit a woman? She asked. No, he said. Ever want to? He looked away, jaw twitching. Not once. She stepped back into the room and left the door open behind her. He never crossed the threshold, but something changed in her that night. Not trust, not hope, but the first soft shift of a life long hardened. A breath returned to her ribs. It would take seasons yet before she learned to love him. But that night, for the first time since childhood, she slept without dreaming. Spring in Vesper came late and mean, the snow melting into mud that swallowed boots and rusted tools. Evelyn learned to walk with a staff when she crossed the yard, balancing like a crow on shifting ice. The pigs rooted deeper. The hens laid fewer eggs. A stillborn calf collapsed in the thawing muck, eyes wide as if startled by death. Matthew buried it without a word. He'd started leaving the house earlier. Fence repairs, firewood cutting, mule shoeing, the work of a man who didn't believe in rest. He left coffee and bread for her each morning, and sometimes notes beside them. Just scraps, always in that same steady hand. Pond's thawing, best not go near it. New knife in the drawer, yours if you want it. You did fine yesterday. She read them twice, never replied. But her hands worked differently afterward, faster, steadier. Less like she was being watched, more like she could own her own motions. By mid-April she could start the fire herself. By May she cooked dinner without trembling over the knife. The sound of flint against steel no longer made her flinch. When Matthew returned each evening, he washed his hands and sat at the table with a nod, and the silence between them had begun to soften. Not comfort yet, but something close. The first time he called her Evie, he didn't mean to. They were branding a heifer that had gone loose the week before, cornered it against the dry creek bed. She held the rope taut, arms locked, boots braced. It kicked wild, nearly tore free. He caught it behind the shoulder, wrestled it down, pressed the iron firm to its flank. The stink of seared hair rose like old death. You all right, Evie? He asked, not even looking up. She froze. The name clung to her like smoke. No one had called her that since her mother died. Yes, she said, not knowing whether to be grateful or afraid. He didn't say it again for a long time. There was a pistol above the mantel. She noticed it one storm-heavy afternoon when she stayed in to mend a tear in the quilt. A Colt Navy, worn but clean, its barrel still oiled. When he came in from the barn, drenched and tired, she asked him what it was for. Coyotes. Strays just in case. You ever use it on a man? He looked at her, not hard, just level. Once. She waited, but he didn't say more. Did he deserve it? Yes. She didn't press further. She knew the weight of silence when it held truth like a stone in its fist. Later that night, she stood by the fire and studied the pistol while he sat nearby mending a bridle. His hands were gentle with the leather. Her voice came quiet. Will you teach me? He looked up to shoot. She nodded. He put down the bridle. Tomorrow. The first time she fired it, she missed the can by a yard and bruised her shoulder. He didn't laugh, didn't speak. Just handed it back and let her try again. By the third day, she could hit clean. By the 10th, she didn't blink at the sound. There was something in her arms now, memory, steadiness. Her fingers didn't shake. You aim like someone who's been afraid too long, he said once. I have. He paused beside her. Not anymore. That night, she left her door unbolted. Come June, word spread in town that a man named Roan Mercer had been released from Yuma. Served 7 years for robbing a rail caravan and splitting a deputy's skull with an axe handle. No one was glad to hear his name. Evelyn didn't know it, not until she went with Matthew into town to sell pork and flour. The general store was full of dust and drawled voices. Matthew traded without fuss. Evelyn stood back near the tack wall, listening. That was when she heard it. You hear about Mercer, back in these parts. Stayed downriver for a spell, but folks say he's working his way toward Vesper. Hell for women, that one. Never got tried for what he did before. What was that? You ask the preacher's daughter. Matthew came out of the back then, loaded the sack of grain on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. On the ride home, Evelyn sat stiff beside him. He said nothing, but she could feel it in him. That name had set something off. That night, she waited until the fire dimmed and asked what Mercer had done. He didn't look at her, just answered flat. Hurt a girl once, bad, left her to die. Did she? He nodded, eventually. Why wasn't he hung? No witnesses, just scars and silence. Evelyn clenched her fists. She knew about that. The summer came hard. Dust replaced snow. Flies came in swarms. She learned to shoot gophers off the fence line, learned to boil lye soap, learned to make her own poultice when she burned her arm on the kettle. Matthew built her a second wardrobe by hand. She found it beside the bed one morning with her name carved into the inside panel. She traced it with her fingers for nearly an hour. No one had ever carved her name before, not in anything that lasted. One night in July, thunder rolled low across the valley. The storm never broke, just sat heavy in the hills. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She went out to the porch and found Matthew already there, smoking his pipe, boots bare on the rail. You miss it? She asked. What? The war. No. She waited. You ever kill someone besides that one? He looked at her through the smoke. 3, that I know of. She didn't ask why. He didn't volunteer it. Instead, she stepped closer and stood beside him. The night was warm, the air thick with something unsaid. After a long silence, she reached out and touched his hand. He let her. They sat there until dawn, not touching more, not needing to. Something had changed again, not a leap, a shift. Like a creek cutting deeper into stone each year, like something finding its course. It was late August when Roan Mercer came to Vesper. Evelyn didn't hear his name until the butcher's boy came riding hard up the path with a blood-nosed mule and breathless words. Saw him near Ridge Hollow, got a rifle and a dog with him. Said he's looking for work, but I know his face. Matthew took down the colt, cleaned it slow, set it beside his plate at supper. You think he'll come here? Evelyn asked. He nodded once. Why? I knew the girl. Her name was Ruth. She had hair like yours. The truth landed between them. Evelyn picked up the pistol and weighed it in her palm, heavy, honest. "Let him," she said. Matthew didn't argue. The bolt on her door stayed unlocked that night. The sun rose yellow, and the day Roan Mercer came to the ranch. Evelyn saw him first from the root cellar, where she was hauling up onions. Just a speck down by the southern edge of the pasture, where the cottonwoods leaned over the creek. He rode a dun mare with a limp and wore a long coat too thick for the heat. His dog loped beside him, a brindle mutt with one ear torn to the root. She set the crate down slow and went to the house. Matthew was at the forge beside the barn, reshaping a rusted hinge. She didn't need to speak. He saw her face and wiped the soot from his hands. No panic, no rush, just quiet movement. "Stay in the house," he said. She didn't. Instead, she fetched the colt from the mantel and stood in the kitchen, hands steady, watching the edge of the trees. The kind of stillness came over her that used to mean hiding. Now it meant something else. Waiting. Roan came slow up the path, grinning like a man already unpunished. His face was broad, sun-worn, with pitted cheeks and teeth like fence posts. He carried his rifle loose across his lap and called out before he dismounted. "Hell of a spread you got here, Calloway." Matthew stood by the porch post, arms crossed, hammer still in one hand. His face didn't move. "You're not welcome." "Didn't ask to be," Roan replied. "Just passing through, figured I'd say hello." He looked toward the window. Evelyn stepped back into the shadow, but not far, not hiding. Roan tilted his head. "You got company, don't you?" "That her." Matthew stepped down off the porch. "Leave." Roan laughed. "Ain't no crime in talking." "You get one more sentence." Roan spat. "Pretty little thing. Might be I seen her before, or maybe just someone like her." Matthew raised the hammer. "You got 5 seconds to turn that mule around." Roan's grin died. His dog growled low. "You still think you can play righteous, Calloway? You think war makes you clean?" "No," Matthew said. "But I know what filth looks like." Roan's eyes narrowed. For a second, Evelyn thought he might raise the rifle. She saw his knuckles tighten. Her finger curled over the trigger, but Roan turned. Spat again, swung up into the saddle. "Ain't finished," he muttered. Matthew didn't answer, watched him go until the trees swallowed him. That night, Evelyn sat with the pistol in her lap. They didn't light the lantern, just the fire low. Outside, the wind rose. "You said you knew the girl," she said after a long time. "Ruth, she was 16. What did he do to her?" Matthew's voice didn't change. "Everything." Evelyn nodded. "I want to know how to kill a man and live with it." He looked at her. "You already do." She didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because something in her was waking up and wouldn't close its eyes. The next 3 days passed under the shadow of Roan's return. No one saw him. No one heard his dog, but tracks came fresh each morning, hoofprints near the North Ridge, spent cartridges on the path to the spring. Once, a dead rabbit hung from the gate, its belly slit open, organs removed. Matthew said nothing. Just burned it. On the 4th day, Evelyn went riding alone. She took the dapple-gray up into the pines, where the undergrowth thickened and blue jays screamed at anything that moved. She carried the colt in her saddlebag and a knife at her boot. She needed to feel the forest again, to learn how sound worked when you were alone, not hunted, not caged, just aware. She found him just past dusk. He wasn't looking for her. He was setting snares beneath a bluff, whistling low, unaware. His coat was slung over a branch. His dog gnawed a deerbone in the shade. Evelyn stepped down from her horse and moved like wind over stone. She didn't draw the pistol. She drew the knife. She got within 6 feet before he heard her. He turned too slow. "You." She didn't speak, just drove the point into his thigh, straight through the meat, angled up toward the groin. He howled, fell. The dog lunged. She fired once into the air, and it fled. Roan writhed in the dirt, clutching the wound. She stood over him. That was for Ruth, she said. He bared his teeth, tried to rise. She kicked his wrist. He screamed again. You gonna kill me, girl? Not today. She left him there, bleeding and snarling, his breath wet with pain, took his rifle, took his boots, left the snares unsprung. She rode back before the stars had fully risen. Matthew was on the porch. Was he there? Yes. He looked at her, at the blood on her skirt, at the rifle slung across her back. You all right? She nodded. He didn't ask more. That night, she bathed in cold water behind the house, then crawled into bed and lay on her side, facing the wall. The next morning, the dog came back without its master. Roan Mercer was never seen in Vesper again. September came hard. The sky cleared, but the air turned mean. Evelyn took over the books, tracking the feed stores, counting the winter grain, writing neat ledgers in a brown journal with leather covers. Matthew watched her sometimes from the barn door, not like a man watching a woman. Like a man trying to understand how something broken learns to build. They didn't talk about what happened in the woods. She began to sleep with her door open every night. He never crossed it, but his boots came close. Sometimes she woke and heard the floorboards creak just outside. Sometimes he left water by her bed. On the equinox, he asked her what she wanted for her name. She was cutting apples. What do you mean? You never said if you wanted mine. She looked at him long and still, the knife paused in her hand. Not yet, she said, but maybe soon. He nodded once, no hurt in it, just quiet agreement. That night she wrote her name on the inside of her journal. Not his, not her father's, just Evie, nothing more, nothing less. She didn't know it yet, but she was learning how to live, not survive, live. It was the smallest things that taught her, the weight of her own handwriting, the warmth of a kitchen she'd built fire in, the fact that no one came when she spilled something, no one shouted when she dropped a dish. The silence here was not the silence of threat, it was space. By October, she loved the wind. By November, she loved the horse. By December, she could admit she might, one day, love the man. But not until she'd buried the last of Kentucky in her bones. Not until she'd said goodbye to the girl who'd slept under belts and flinched at kindness. Love would come, but not like lightning, like thaw. Slow and certain, reshaping the earth without asking, and when it came, it would stay. The first snow fell in silence, just after the final sheep was brought down from the ridge. Evelyn stood in the doorway and watched it drift, light, slow, without weight, like a hush laid over the valley. She'd never seen snow fall from the start before. In Kentucky, snow had always arrived as aftermath. Slush, cracked ice, angry footprints. Here, it came like a blanket laid over the world by a careful hand. Matthew came in from the barn, his coat powdered white, beard catching flakes like threads. He shook himself near the stove and nodded once, the way he always did. She poured coffee without a word and set it on the table. He didn't touch it right away. Just sat, hands resting like anchors, and watched her. You ever been truly warm? He asked, voice rasped from cold. She blinked. Not until here. That answer seemed to lodge something in him. He reached out then, slowly, openly, and touched her wrist. A calloused thumb brushing bone. He didn't move closer, didn't tighten his grip. But he stayed there, contact unbroken, and for Evelyn, that was the loudest gesture he'd made since she stepped off the train. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm up and let his fingers fold into hers. Later that night, with a storm building in the hills and the fire low, she placed the pistol back on the mantel, not from forgetfulness, from choice, from trust. He watched her. Said nothing, but he stayed in the room after she went to bed. That was the beginning of something unspoken, not courtship, not ceremony, just a joining. Each day after, they moved like halves of one life, never needing to explain. She woke before him to start the fire. He stayed up late oiling tools she didn't yet know how to use. They shared work, bread, silence. And slowly that silence became soft. Not everything was easy. There were nights she woke gasping, clutching her throat. Sometimes she hid out before her mind caught up. Once she struck Matthew hard across the face as he reached to steady her. He didn't flinch, just stepped back, hands up. "It's all right." "No," she whispered, "it's not." He didn't try to fix it, just sat in the corner until she breathed again. The next morning he brought her a book from the attic, one he said had belonged to his mother, Jane Eyre. She read it in pieces, slow. Some nights she read aloud. He never asked her to, just listened. When she reached the part about fire and ruin, she closed the book and looked at him across the table. "Do you believe some people are meant to be burned before they can be whole?" "I think some fires clean," he said. "Others just leave you ash." "And me. You're still burning." December deepened. Ice thickened at the creek mouth. The pig stayed inside. The mare grew sluggish with pregnancy. Evelyn made soap, brewed bone broth, mended the sleeves of his only good shirt with red thread. When she asked him once why he never bought new clothes, he answered, "Some things you keep, even when they don't fit right no more." She knew he wasn't talking about the shirt. One evening she went into town alone, her first time since Roan Mercer disappeared. The butcher's boy tipped his hat and asked if she'd be teaching his sister how to shoot come spring. The widow at the mercantile offered her 2 jars of molasses free, said it was payment for what she'd heard. No one said Roan's name. But everyone knew. She rode back through twilight, the air cut glass against her cheeks, her coat too thin. She didn't mind. Cold was different now. She had skin again, a body that obeyed. When she reached the ranch, Matthew was splitting wood under the porch awning. She watched him for a while before dismounting. "Town's smaller than I remembered," she said. "You're bigger now." She nodded. That night, she found a wool cloak folded on the bed. No note, just the cloak, and inside its hem, stitched small and crooked, her name, Evie Calloway. He never asked, she never answered. But from then on, when they went to town, she gave his name without flinching. Not for ownership, for belonging. Winter tested the ranch. A frost killed the young sprouts too early. Wolves took 2 lambs. The mare miscarried. Evelyn dug the grave herself, hands raw, knees sunk in frozen mud. When Matthew found her there, she was still holding the tiny foal's head in her lap. He didn't speak, just lifted her up, cleaned her hands, and laid her down by the fire. They didn't touch. They didn't cry. But in the quiet, she reached for his hand and didn't let go. That night, she told him the last part of her story. She told him about the first time her father hit her. About the time he broke her arm and the doctor said she'd fallen from the loft. About the boy she'd once tried to run away with, who'd been caught and whipped in her place. About her mother, who died trying to step between them. She didn't weep, just spoke. When she finished, Matthew said nothing. He stood, left the room. She thought for a moment he might not come back, but when he did, he held a box. Inside, a photograph, a child, a woman, a man in Union blue. "My brother," he said, "and my nephew." She waited. They were killed in Kansas. Raiders, I wasn't there. I promised to bring them west. Instead, I brought guilt. She reached into the box and took the photo. Not for comfort, for proof. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, until dawn cracked red across the hills. She fell asleep against his shoulder. He didn't move until she woke. When spring finally broke, it came fast. Like a dam bursting, crocus blooms ripped through the snowpack, creek beds turned wild with melt. Evelyn took off her boots and waded in just to feel the sting. She planted beets, sewed new sleeves onto her old dress. Cut her hair just below the jaw. When Matthew saw her that evening, he paused by the corral. "Looks like you," he said. "Maybe it always did." They walked side by side along the ridge that night. Coyotes howled in the far hills. The sky turned indigo. When she took his hand, he didn't ask anything. When she kissed him, he just let it happen, not sudden, not desperate, like lighting a fire that had waited all its life for the right match. That was the first night they lay together, not as strangers, not as saviors, just two people who had each lived too long without softness. They didn't speak during or after. There was no need. The past would always live in them. But now so would something else, something that could grow. Summer crept in like a slow exhale. The hills turned from ash to green, and the soil warmed beneath Evelyn's feet. She worked barefoot most days, sleeves rolled, hair tied back with a strip of calico. Her skin browned, her hands grew rougher, but her spine, for the first time, stood tall. She and Matthew moved with rhythm now, not routine, something older, like weather. They could pass a full day without more than 10 words and still feel as if they'd shared everything. He built her a bathhouse beside the creek, paneled with salvaged pine and crowned with a crooked chimney. She grew herbs behind the smokehouse, sage, rosemary, feverfew. The house began to change too. He carved new cabinet handles from antler, set a shelf above the hearth for her books. She stitched a red curtain for the front window. At first he said it would be too bright. By the next week he called it lucky. But not all things softened. One morning a letter came, brought by the preacher's boy on a mule with a limp. No return name, just black ink on the envelope. Matthew set it on the table and said nothing. Evelyn opened it with a knife. Inside, 2 sentences scrawled in her father's hand. "You left something behind, not money, not guilt. Come get it or I'll make sure the law finds you." She didn't tremble, she didn't flinch. But she sat down slow, as if the weight of that name still lived in her knees. Matthew read the note over her shoulder and asked only one question. What did he mean? She shook her head. "I don't know, could be a lie, could be a child. Could be a name I forgot to bury." Matthew picked up the envelope, lit it in the fire, and didn't look away until it turned to smoke. "You don't owe him." "But I owe something," she said. "Even if it's the end." That night she sat by the creek and thought about blood, not what it means to share it, but what it means to spill it. She'd never killed anyone, not fully, but there had been moments. That knife in Roan's leg. The way her silence let others suffer back in Kentucky. The way she'd vanished like a ghost and never looked back. The past wasn't gone, just quiet. And quiet things had a way of coming back loud. They left before dawn. She rode the gray, he took the brown mule. The journey east took 6 days, across high prairie, river valleys, rail towns where men watched her with hunger she didn't return. They camped in dry gullies and once in the ruins of an old church where coyotes nested behind the altar. She didn't speak much. He didn't press her. On the 7th day, they came down into the valley where she'd been born. The trees were thinner. The grass brittle, the house still stood, leaning now, slats warped, chimney crumbled, the barn had collapsed. A single lantern burned in the window. She left her horse by the gate. Matthew offered her the pistol. She took it but didn't draw. Inside, the air stank of whiskey and mice. Her father sat slumped in a chair, boots unlaced, shirt unwashed. His hair was gone, scalp blotched with sores, his eyes lit with something when he saw her. "Girl," he rasped. "Thought you never come." She said nothing. He pointed to a corner of the room. A wooden box sat beneath a tattered quilt, her mother. "You left that behind, thought maybe you'd come fetch it." "What else?" she asked. He grinned, yellow teeth and rot. "Nothing." Matthew stepped through the doorway then, and the old man leaned back, wary. "Don't like company, huh?" he said. "She always did like dogs that didn't bite." Matthew didn't move. Evelyn crossed the room, knelt by the box, opened it. Inside, a dress, a ribbon, a dried braid of black hair, and under that papers, old ones, birth record, a name she hadn't heard in years, her sister. She stood slowly. What happened to May? Ran off, same as you, ended up worse. Where? He shrugged. Someplace west, told me she was married, didn't sound right. Her hand closed on the grip of the Colt. He didn't flinch. Go on, girl, you gonna do it, do it. She stepped forward, close enough to smell the death already growing in him. She saw the knot of his throat bob just once. You're not worth killing, she said. Then she turned, walked out. They burned the box that night. She held her mother's ribbon until it blackened in the flame, then let it fall. Matthew didn't speak until the last cinder faded. You want to find her. My sister. He nodded. I don't even know if she's still breathing. But if she is, I'll find her. She looked east once more, then turned her back on the house. Not today. On the ride home, something shifted in her posture. She sat taller, moved quicker, slept less. She spoke more too. Little things, how the sky over Vesper looked bluer. How the scent of pine in June made her feel 8 years old. How she used to braid May's hair by candlelight and pretend the world was fair. Matthew never told her he loved her, not with words. But when they came over the last ridge and saw the ranch spread out below, he reached for her hand and held it the whole way down. 2 weeks later, she bled for the first time in 5 months. She said nothing at first. Waited, counted days with quiet dread. Then one morning she touched her belly and knew. He found her sitting on the porch swing, arms crossed tight. You all right? She didn't answer right away. Then, there's a child. His eyes flicked once to her stomach, then back to her face. All right. She waited for more, fear, panic, denial, but none came. He sat beside her. All right, he said again. We'll make room. She pressed her hand against his. I don't know if I'm ready. He looked at her. You weren't ready for this place either. Now look what you made of it. She closed her eyes and let the wind carry the fear away, one breath at a time. There would be hard days ahead. She knew that. But she had chosen this life, and now something had chosen her back. The child came in a storm. Spring had broken too early that year, softening the earth before the skies turned again. By late March the valley roared with rain, creek banks spilling their guts into the fields. Evelyn woke to contractions before dawn, the windows thrumming with wind, thunder grumbling in the ridgeline like something ancient come home. Matthew lit the lamp without a word. He'd already boiled water, laid clean cloth by the bed, tethered the mule and shut the chickens in. He'd waited with that quiet certainty she had come to lean on, not confidence but readiness. The kind of steadiness you earn when the world's tried to break you and failed. She labored for hours, face turned into the mattress, hands clenched around the post. Pain like red knives through her hips, every breath stolen and remade. There was a moment she thought she'd die, when the blood came heavy, when her body screamed with the echo of old beatings, when the past tried to crawl back into her skin. Matthew didn't leave her side. You're here, she gasped, somewhere between agony and dark. I'll always be here, he said. The child came just after noon, slick and screaming, fists balled, mouth wide like a warning to the world. A girl. Matthew cut the cord with shaking hands. Evelyn didn't cry, not even then. She stared at the baby's face, the fine black hair already curling, the heat of her body pressed to hers like a seal. Then she leaned back and looked at the ceiling and let the silence take her, not from emptiness, from awe. They named her Ruth, not after his dead, not after her ghosts, but because the name had survived. Because someone had to carry the quiet into the next life and do it differently. Ruth slept light, ate fiercely, screamed like a hawk when she was hungry. Evelyn learned to swaddle her one-handed, to feed her with an eye half closed, to rock her slow while gutting fish or folding laundry. Her back hurt, her breasts cracked, she bled for weeks, but she did not disappear. Matthew carried Ruth on his back when he fenced the western pasture. He carved her a rattle from birch, built her a cradle that rocked so gently you could believe in peace. One evening, when Ruth was 4 months old, Evelyn stood by the creek and watched a fox drink from the far bank. The water had calmed again. The grass grew high along the edges, whispering secrets to the wind. She looked down at the child in her arms, brown-eyed, stone-faced, already solemn. "I'm not afraid for you," she whispered. She meant it. The ranch grew. A second barn went up with help from neighbors who once stared too long and now offered strong backs and quiet nods. Evelyn taught the butcher's sister to fire a pistol and taught the blacksmith's boy how to bind a wound. In the fall, she helped midwife the preacher's wife through a breech birth, hands deep in blood and prayer. They began to call her Mrs. Calloway in town. She never corrected them, not because the paper said so, but because she had earned the name. She and Matthew never wore rings. There was no ceremony, no preacher, just a child, a house. Two hands held over a fence rail in winter, the kind of bond that didn't ask permission. They still had hard nights. Ruth grew sick once with fever and nearly slipped away. Evelyn stayed awake 3 days beside her, singing broken lullabies into sweat-soaked skin. Matthew dug a grave and filled it back in when she lived. Old wounds still woke Evelyn sometimes, in dreams, in smells, in the way certain men looked at her when she rode into town, but she did not live in those places anymore. She returned to them now and then only to measure how far she'd come. She wrote letters to Kentucky once a year, sent no return address, just words to May. "If you're alive, I am too. If you're alone, you're not. There is a place here, I made it." She never got a reply, but she kept writing. Ruth turned 6 the year the last wolf came down from the hills. It took a goat and cornered her near the woodpile. She didn't scream. She stood tall, small fists raised. Evelyn found her there, eyes locked with the beast frozen mid-step. She fired once. The wolf fell. Ruth didn't look away. Later, Evelyn held her on the porch and asked, "Were you scared?" Ruth shook her head. "I knew you'd come." Matthew stood nearby, arms crossed. "She's yours," he said. "No," Evelyn replied, "she's her own." But she smiled. The land bore fruit, not easily, but surely. Evelyn planted apple trees and buried a braid of her own hair beneath the roots. Come harvest, they bore small, bitter apples with red streaks down the middle. Ruth called them blood hearts. Matthew laughed like a man who thought joy was something you had to dig for. And when Evelyn took his hand that night, in the shadow of the trees, she said it for the first time, not because it was needed, but because it was true. "I love you." He didn't answer, just pressed his forehead to hers and let her say it again. Years passed, Ruth grew strong, Matthew's hair went gray. Evelyn planted lavender beside the porch and watched the bees come and go with the seasons. They built a bigger corral, took in a neighbor boy who lost his father to fever. He helped mend fences and learned to cook under Evelyn's sharp eye. Sometimes she thought about her father's house, the room she left behind, the woman she'd been before all this. But mostly, she thought about the girl who'd arrived on a train with nothing but a valise and a letter and a heart full of fear. That girl was gone now. And in her place stood a woman who had learned that love, real love, wasn't soft. It was steady. It was quiet. It waited. It bled. It held fast through fire and ruin and returned with clean hands. It did not flinch. One cold autumn morning, Evelyn stood in the doorway with Ruth, now 10, her boots too big, her eyes sharp. Together they watched the hills turn gold. The wind carried the scent of frost and pine. Matthew was mending the fence. The sky above them stretched wide and gray and endless. Ruth looked up. Are we safe here? Evelyn thought for a moment, then nodded. For now, and when we're not, we fight. She laid a hand on her daughter's shoulder. And in that moment, brief, bright, and wordless, everything she had endured, every wound, every mile, every silence came to rest. Not forgotten, but carried, and never alone again.